Welcome to Fun with Annuities with your host, me, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. Can annuities be fun? Can contractual guarantees be fun? Absolutely they can. Find out the brutal facts about annuities with no sales pitches or high-pressure nonsense. Just the brutal and factual annuity truth, which is all you need to hear. Let's have some fun with annuities, and let's have that fun start right now. Welcome to Fun with Annuities. I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent licensed in all 50 states. This is the #1 annuity podcast on the planet for a reason, and that reason is we bring on people that aren't just going to talk about money. They're going to talk about life. They're going to talk about specific things that they focus on and they are experts in. And today's person that's on the podcast, we're so happy that he's here. His name is Loren Feldman. And he's the editor-in-chief and founder of something called 21 Hats, and we're going to get to that. 21 Hats is a platform for business owners where he edits a daily newsletter for entrepreneurs and hosts a podcast called 21 Hats. He's got a big-time background, so let's just kind of go through some of it, not all of it. He also co-hosted a call-in show for business owners on Sirius XM Radio called Mind Your Business. And previously, he was a senior editor at Forbes, which you all have heard of, where he created the Forbes Small Giants franchise, which was responsible for entrepreneurial coverage in print and online, both sides. Before that, he was a small business editor of the New York Times, where he started the You're the Boss small business blog you might be familiar with. He's also been editor of websites at both Inc., that's I-N-C with a period, Inc., and Fast Company. And before going digital, he was the top editor and writer for print magazines such as Inc., Philadelphia Manhattan Inc., The American Lawyer, Money, and George, which I'm not mistaken is the John Kennedy Jr. Effort before John tragically passed away. He's also written for GQ, the New York Times Magazine, the New York Times Sunday Business section. Obviously, he's talented and busy at the same time. Welcome to Fun with Annuities, Loren Feldman. Loren, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Stan. So happy to be here.
Was I right about the George magazine? Was I right about that?
You're basically right. It is the John Kennedy magazine that you recall, but I actually went to the magazine, sadly, after he had passed away. Typical mistake in the publishing industry. The French company Hachette Philippaki that actually owned the publication, when he died, they put him on the cover, and of course the magazine sold out in instants, and they decided that meant that there really was a future for this magazine even without him. So they hired a successor, and his successor hired me as the & 2. And we gave it a go for about a year, but it didn't work out.
Just the basics of 21 Hats. Neat. I like how, the website, and we're going to have this on our website at theannuityman.com. Loren's going to have his permanent page there where you can go, and his site is 21, the number 21, 21 Hats, all one, no space, 21hats.com. Tell me about 21 Hats. Where did that come from?
It really grew out of the history that you already elaborated. I've basically been doing the same thing, covering entrepreneurship and business owners for about 20 years. First at Inc., then at the New York Times, then at Forbes. And at each place, I learned a lot. I felt like I figured out important things about what can actually be helpful in terms of supporting business owners and reporting on what they do. But I never really felt as though I was able to put it all together in one spot. Each of those publications had their own mission, their own needs, their own hopes and dreams. And what I was hoping to do didn't quite fit with any of them. So eventually I decided to go off and try to do it on my own, which is what I'm doing now.
And 21 comes from what? You're wearing 21 hats, I'm assuming?
Well, the point, as I'm sure you realize, is that to be a business owner, you have to wear a lot of hats, and nobody's prepared to wear them all. So we're there to help you figure out the ones you need help with. The number 21 specifically is a little bit arbitrary, to to be honest, I kind of like the sound of it, and the URL was available, so that's what I went with.
Yeah, the better story I think we're going to come up with right now is Loren played running back for, let's pick a school, for Rutgers, and he was 21, and that's how it all, I don't know. Where'd you go to school?
Yeah, how did I forget? That's what it was.
He was point guard for St. John's, and his number was 21, and he set the, and we can just keep going from there.
Yes.
I think it's interesting that you're on, because entrepreneurs, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I love saying that because it sounds a little edgy, but I am a serial entrepreneur. I mean, I love falling off that cliff every day. But my job as the annuity man is to transfer risk. When people buy an annuity, they're transferring the risk to the annuity company to do specific things, whether it's income or protect principal or long-term care or legacy, whatever. But entrepreneurs are all about risk. Is this a good environment for entrepreneurs? Is there ever a bad environment for entrepreneurs?
That's such an interesting question. I think there are good and bad environments, but they aren't necessarily what people think. You always, like after the Great Recession and then coming out of the worst of the pandemic, which I know isn't completely over yet, despite our best wishes. There are always a lot of businesses that get started during periods like that, and there's a lot of coverage of it suggesting, what a time to start a business. Isn't this crazy? But it actually makes a lot of sense to start a business during a difficult time period for all sorts of reasons. Part of it is just necessity. Some people lose their jobs and can't find another one, and they're kind of forced to do something that perhaps they always wanted to do anyway, but didn't want to walk away from a job that they thought was secure, and then suddenly it wasn't secure, and they decide to do what they wanted to do, and that can be a fabulous thing, even during what looks like a terrible time. The other thing is that if you have a good idea, no matter how good it is, it still takes time to figure it out and to get things right. And it's not a bad thing to have it happen during a down period when things might be a little slower than otherwise. You can see what works and play around a little bit and get it right. And then when the economy picks up and your phone starts ringing a little bit more, you're ready for it. That's a positive thing. So I think a lot of it has to do, you're going to have fewer startups when the economy is roaring and people are, gainfully employed and not necessarily looking to go somewhere. So it's a little bit different right now. We've been on a downtrend for a long time, but there have been fewer and fewer startups each year for quite a few years now. This past year, since 2020, it really picked up, and obviously a lot of that it was by necessity. People who didn't have another alternative, but I'm hoping that's a positive thing and it keeps going, and that we do have more startups now. There are other factors, of course, I think what's happened with the consolidation of the big tech companies is not good for startups. So that there are other extrinsic factors like that come into it, and right now that's a difficult thing. Facebook and Apple and Google, they're not making it easier for startups these days.
Yeah, I always say that there's no timing when you have passion, and there's no politics and there's no parties when you're passionate about what you do. People that know my story about starting, no one wakes up in the morning, Loren, and says, you know what, I want to be Stan the Annuity Man. No one does that. But what I saw in the annuity industry was a gaping hole that still exists, that I'm the only one that seems to be filling, of selling contractual guarantees, telling the truth, being brutally factual. I call myself the walking middle finger of annuity truth, and providing information and access to all of the quotes that people don't have to sign up for. And we really have a mantra here that this is where annuities are bought, not sold. And that's my passion. My passion is kind of flipping the industry upside down, and I would assume most entrepreneurs have that as well. The people that are listening to this probably fall into two categories. They're either entrepreneurs or A personalities that are now going into chapter 2 of their life, or they're entrepreneurs legit right now that are trying to figure out, do annuities fit? And I think that's the juggling act. And when you talk to these entrepreneurs and interview them and on your podcast and when you write, are entrepreneurs just all consumed with surviving and taking those risks? Are they also thinking about, okay, down the road, I'm going to have to plan for retirement and look to transfer risk? What are you hearing from them?
Very few of them are sufficiently planning for retirement. I can
And I
assure you of
understand
that.
that.
Yeah, it's not even, but it's not even just the ones who are fighting for survival. Way too few business owners think seriously about issues like succession and retirement. It's just not top of mind for enough of them, and that's a really unfortunate thing that a lot of people have tried to address, and hopefully it will break through more. But it's interesting what you say about, thinking about the risks. On the podcast I've been talking to the same group of 7 or 8 business owners since before the pandemic hit. And I talked to 3 of them each week. And when I started before the pandemic, I wasn't sure how long I would stick with them. Maybe people get tired of their stories, tired of their voices, want to meet at other groups. But when the pandemic hit, things got really dramatic for each of them. And I think my listeners got invested in figuring out, are they going to make it or not? And it became a very different conversation. We had some very emotional talks with entrepreneurs who weren't sure their business was going to survive this period. But there are also other businesses on the group who did far better during the pandemic than they would have anticipated if there hadn't been a pandemic. So, it's hard to generalize. You just don't know. And what it adds up to is, for most small business owners, they're just stretched too thin, whether times are good or it's, whether times are bad, obviously. But even when times are good, that can be catastrophic in its own way if you can't keep up and you can't keep to your commitments. And that happens all the time as well. So, unfortunately, succession and retirement planning is usually something that is left,
and I totally agree with that. I fall into the category from a business owner of, don't confuse a virus or a pandemic with genius. We were set up in a direct and consumer model when that wasn't the cool thing to be. And I just thought that was the way annuities should be sold. And so when the pandemic hit, just insight for the listeners that probably don't know this, we've had record years only because during this, and I don't feel guilty about that, because we've worked hard and but I also am not beating my chest that, we hung the moon just because we were ready for it, just technology wise. Now everyone's trying to catch up with what we're trying to do. But I think it also comes down to just still the passion of what you're trying to provide to the client. One of the things that's interesting as we're talking about this is I'm thinking about entrepreneurism from a couple of standpoints. Because right now I'm in my late 50s. Who knows how long the standing annuity man thing will go, hopefully forever. But there will come a time in my life that there will be a chapter 2 of my entrepreneurism. And I think a lot of people listening to this, Loren, are thinking, yeah, I did that business thing and I did it hard, but I'm still kind of an entrepreneur. Can you address in your mind the person that's transitioning to chapter 2, which is they're retiring, thinking about retirement, or not working like they used to, but they still want to push themselves and be creative? Do you see that as a gap that you probably need to fill and address, of those baby boomers, and there's 10,000 hitting age 65 every day, which to me is a demographic tidal wave, but there's a lot of those still want to play, and they still want to, I'm going to say take risk, but take some of their money and still try things?
It's a great question. And I think I haven't done a serious study of this, but anecdotally from the people that I know, I will tell you that few people are better positioned than entrepreneurs and business owners to have that second chapter and to find a meaningful way to do something that they really care about once they've reached a point where they're ready to step back from whatever it is they've spent most of their time building and creating. But the one thing that gets in the way of that is that too many business owners, as we were saying, don't prepare for a transition. If you're working too much in your business, you can't sell it, you can't turn it over to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make yourself operationally irrelevant, and that's a hard bridge for a lot of people to cross. But for those that do, the opportunities are incredible. There are just so many things that I see people doing, whether it's, some people start a nonprofit that focuses in an area that they are passionate about. Oftentimes it's helping other entrepreneurs in some way, shape, or form. The other thing you can do is volunteer your time, or it doesn't have to be voluntary. You can help out at a startup, wear one or two of those hats for somebody who
Sure.
is overly burdened, and maybe you become a director, you sit on a board, you get paid a little bit. And of course, the most obvious one of all is there's always the opportunity to take some of the money that you've made and invest it in somebody else's vision and help out a little bit. And that's, those opportunities aren't there for everybody when they reach that stage of life. It's a great thing for entrepreneurs to be able to figure out and find a way to remain engaged in something they love.
I tell my clients all the time that they're always asking me, where do I put my money? Where's the best place to put? And there are times that I say, with your background, and most of these people are successful and they're talking to me and they have high net worths, angel investing is a form of entrepreneurism. I do think that the country, and maybe your podcast and what you're doing could address this down the road, is looking at entrepreneurism in two phases, which is that 25-year-old to 50-year-old phase where you're just going 100 miles an hour. As I say, you're rolling the dice overhand with a running start. And then there's that 50 to 75 or 50 to 80, because we're all living longer. 50 to 80 entrepreneur, that's a little different. It's a little bit more scaled back. And as we all know, the older we are, we kind of are better entrepreneurs because we've had our rear ends kicked a few times and we don't make those mistakes. I always like the story about Ray Kroc, who was, I believe, in his 60s when he actually founded McDonald's. And he had been through a lot of ups and downs, and you're not going to hit every shot. There's not going to be 100% success. I would encourage you to think about those people that are listening to this podcast, which are, they're not ready. They might be 65, they might be 70, but don't tell them that because they'll kick your rear end and they're ready to keep going, regardless of what the spouse wants them to do.
One of the people on my podcast is a guy who owns the largest picture framing operation in America. It's a business based in Chicago. He's 65 years old. He's never had a real job. He's been doing this for 43 years. He loves what he does, but in some ways, he's exactly the person you were talking about. In some ways, he's a little bit different. He's exactly the person you're talking about in that he's become a much better manager. So he is operationally irrelevant. That business can run without him. It took him more than 20 years to get to that point, probably 30 years. But he's there now. But he loves what he does. He loves going to work every day. He doesn't play golf. He's not looking for a hobby. He's not looking for something else to do. He wants to keep doing it. It's actually created a succession issue for him because it's hard for him to hire a number two for a couple of reasons, somebody who could possibly take it over. Now, he's got a younger son who might be interested in it, but he's not sure. But the thing is, he doesn't want to give up running the business. So how does he hire a number two with the promise that, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, or maybe in 20 years, if I'm done with this, maybe then you'll take over. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't think there's a really good person out there who would accept those terms. So he keeps running the business and enjoying his life, which, maybe that's fine. Maybe that's the right answer for him.
One of the things that there are younger people on this podcast that listen to it because it's fun and we bring on interesting, smart people with high IQs. But one of the things about life insurance and annuities, we do have younger clients. I typically say to people, if you're less than 50, you probably don't need an annuity. That's just reality. But in some states, annuities and life insurance can protect you and as an entrepreneur from lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits, creditors, things like that. And I do have a pretty good amount of young entrepreneurs who have told me that situation or read an article I've done, and they're using annuities and life insurance for that creditor protection, because we do live in a litigious world out there. Do the entrepreneurs you talk to, are they concerned about not just legitimate litigation, but some of the frivolous ambulance chasing? Nothing against those people. I'm sure their wife makes a really nice peach cobbler, but chasing after money for money's sake. Is that a concern you hear from entrepreneurs?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody worries about, the frivolous slip and fall or
Mm-hmm.
something of that nature. I mean, if you have a location, you have exposure. And it happens in other ways. I mean, the guy I was just talking about, the picture framer, he was just telling us the other week about this bizarre situation he has with his phone service provider, AT&T. They started overbilling him a couple
By the
of
way,
years
we
ago.
love AT&T. I have an AT&T tattoo on my left arm. But go ahead.
They started overbilling him a couple years ago. They were double billing him. And when he reported it, they said, don't worry about it. Just the easiest way to handle this is keep paying it, and then we'll settle up with you. So he kept paying it. It got up to six figures,
Nice.
$100,000. And when it finally, after going after them, they said, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to fly in a lawyer, and we'll go to some kind of arbitration, and we'll figure this out. And they forced him to take a 10% haircut on what they owed him by basically strong arming him, saying, if you don't accept this, then we're just going to take you to court, and you don't know what's going to happen in court. You got to pay your lawyer, and you could lose. So you better accept this deal. So he did it a couple years ago. And then just a couple of months ago, it happened again. They started double billing him again. And they had the same conversation, but at this time they actually he refused to pay, and they shut off his phones. So he had to go back and double pay. They're back in negotiations again. So these
Typical
kinds of
entrepreneur in me would be like, there might be another phone company. I mean,
well,
nothing against AT&T. I'm sure that's a glitch in the system, but
he has looked into that. The problem is, based on his location, he could not find another provider that could give him the technology that he needed to run a major factory. So
sure.
AT&T really is the only choice there.
Yeah, no, I listen, we all have struggles as entrepreneurs, and the key is just to try to compartmentalize them and know that every day you're catching bullets, because the bullets are coming at you. One other thing that I was just thinking about as you were talking about that is a lot of people that are clients or potential clients of mine, or people that are listening to this podcast, they have retired with significant wealth, and they're almost an entrepreneur managing their money, working with experts like me and other people that manage their money, and then setting it up via CPAs. And people always say, well, I'd love to have the problem of having too much money. The people that are listening to this and watching this, they're saying, well, yeah, but it is kind of a part-time job, somewhat entrepreneurial, to figure out how to maximize everything that you have within the legal system. I think a lot of the baby boomers are falling into that. Well, I'm retired now and I'm going to go play some golf, but I've got to make sure that everything's lined up for the kids and the wife and those type of things. Entrepreneurs, having been one, you do put everything on the back burner except for the business. But I do think that we're going into a world now where people are getting older, and there's different types of entrepreneurs. I don't think entrepreneur just means I'm going to start a sandwich shop, or I'm going to start a service business, or I'm going to start this. It could mean I started the sandwich shop. I'm now done with that. Now I'm either consulting, or I know there's a lot of good organizations where executives can volunteer. I think SCORE is one of them where you can do that and help entrepreneurs. And then I think the third one is, the family business, the family money is its own entrepreneurial play that needs to be respected and addressed. And I don't see any ancillary businesses out there that are addressing that. You have the retirement planners, etc., but it is a business for people that have $1 million to $5 million in net worth, or even more. they'll tell you it's a lot of work to keep it going, even if you hire people to handle it for you. Any comments on that?
Well, there's so much in that. One thing that occurred to me early on when you were talking is I think there's a real opportunity for you and other experts like you to help entrepreneurs even before they step back, because there's, I guess it's part of the occupational hazard of being an entrepreneur. I think too many of them don't realize that they take enough risk in their everyday life. They shouldn't be overloading themselves with risk with the money that they take off the table from their business. And I have this conversation all the time. They love, not, I shouldn't say it's not like it's all of them, but there's a particular slice of them, and it's not a small slice, that it just loves the game. They're smart people. They know business. And as a result, they don't want to put their money in an index fund. they want to put it on black. They want to put it on red. And I think they need good advice to be smart with their money, because as smart as they are, as much as they know about business, they aren't necessarily experts about investing. And I think that's a real issue for a lot of them.
I'm fascinated to know the details of, there's bird watchers and there's people that go watch whales, and there's those, and then there's Loren Feldman. And Loren Feldman is an entrepreneur watcher, which is kind of bizarre. But what fascinates you about the entrepreneurial space? Is it the A personality? Is it the risk taking? Is it the energy? Is it the creativity? What has, because looking back at your lineage of just what you've done, it's always been in that space. Was that something that was forced upon you, and when you got there you said, oh yeah, this is it? Or was this something that was internal that you're like, what makes these people tick?
Again, another great question. When I started out, I worked mostly at magazines. It was a very different media environment. I loved working at long form magazines. I loved being able to write a magazine story where I would get a month or more to really explore a topic and try to write something definitive about it. And to me, I had broad interests. It could be business, but it could also be sports or politics or any number of issues. And I had the opportunity to write a lot of stories and just learn a lot of things by being a nosy reporter who would show up and stick around way too long and ask a lot of impertinent questions. I loved doing that, but it became less economically viable after the internet came along.
Sure.
And I started doing more editing and less writing, and then I kind of developed a little bit of a specialty in being involved in rethinking and redesigning magazines, which I love. It's an exercise in rebranding. It's it's fun, it's exciting, it's creative. I love doing that. And it took me to Inc. magazine, where, I had some business background. I had a degree in economics, and I covered business a little bit, but it was more about big business. It was, or investing. I didn't know entrepreneurship at all. I went to Inc. thinking I would help them rebrand, rethink, and move on within a year or two. But a couple of things happened. One, I went there in 2002, and the market just kept getting worse for media publications, and it became harder to find that next gig. While I was there, I kind of fell in love with the topic, and also the people I was working with at the magazine and the people I was covering, the entrepreneurs. And it was, you started this with a list of, was it this, was it that? It was all the things you mentioned, especially the creativity, and especially understanding the type of risk they take. Because I was, like a lot of journalists, and to this day, some of the smartest journalists I meet, business journalists, don't really understand this. But entrepreneurs take a different kind of risk. Yeah. A lot of my colleagues in the media industry think that the risks are taken in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street. And obviously there are risks taken there, but they're taken with other people's money. It's a different thing. It's not the same thing as an entrepreneur who borrows against their mortgage
or credit cards.
And then, puts it all into their dream that may or may not make it. And I just loved talking to people who had the courage to take that leap and pursue something that they, really believed in, but couldn't tell you for sure was going to succeed. That to me is an amazing thing to do. And so I would talk to my colleagues, and they would say, I understand small business is important in the aggregate. I mean,
Huh.
I forget the percentage of jobs, the
Sure.
percentage of the economy. It's huge, but they're small businesses. Who cares about it? Well, here's why I care about any one small business, because that one small business is somebody's dream. And I
You better
love hearing
believe
the
it.
stories of how people do it. And, a lot of them fail. Part of what attracted
Sure.
to me to it as well is it's the puzzle solving aspect of it. Why do certain businesses succeed and why do some of them fail? And from a journalist standpoint, it's a real challenge to report on those, because if I'm covering a public company, I can go to Yahoo Finance and get
Sure.
all the information I need and everything I need to know, including people to call up, whether they're analysts or former employees or competitors. If I'm writing about somebody's small business, there are very few people who really know what's going on with that business. And even the owner may not really be clear, depending on where they are in their journey. They may or may not really understand why that business is succeeding or not succeeding at any given point in time. So to report on that and write authoritatively about what's working or not working is a real challenge. One, I'll be the first to admit, I don't always get right. We don't always get right. It's impossible, but we do our best. And having done this for 20 years, I feel like I've developed pretty good instincts, and I know the right questions to ask. At least I certainly don't know all the answers, but I think I know the right questions.
What's the biggest flaw that you have kind of, if you could categorize this, and you've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, what's the flaw you hear over and over and over again from entrepreneurs? I can tell you for me, it's, I think the older I get, the more I admit, the less I know, even though I'm successful. I think is it that know-it-all bravado, for lack of a better phrase, or is it something else that is the flaw with entrepreneurs, whether they're successful or not?
I wouldn't call it a flaw, but you're on to something. I think you put your finger on the right thing. For some, it is bravado. For many, that's a piece of it. But here's the thing. If you're going to get a business off the ground, especially if you're walking away from a job, you need to be a little stubborn. You need to be a little cocksure. You need to really believe in what you're doing.
You do.
Because a lot of people are going to tell you you're nuts and ask you why.
Most will.
Most will. Most people do not have the stomach for this, and it could come from your spouse, it could come from your mother, it could come from your accountant. It'll come from all sorts of directions, because everybody knows the percentage of people who succeed in this is less than 50%. I mean, most are not going to succeed.
It's higher. I'm sure it's higher than that. My father never wanted me to be an entrepreneur, which is the contrarian in me. So, well, why wouldn't I? If that's the case, if that's what you don't want, then that's what I want. He just didn't understand it. That's not where he came from, which is actually, he did come from that because his father and my mom's father, to make it back in the Depression era, they both started retail stores on the side as they worked in the textile mills in the South. But they were entrepreneurs enough because they had to make money. I think there's an entrepreneurial streak in everybody. I think that there is a fear factor that prohibits a lot of people from doing it. But I think the biggest thing for most people not taking a risk or not doing something is, unfortunately, they are influenced by what they perceive people will think about what they're doing. And I've always told people, don't listen. Don't care what anyone thinks. If you're passionate about it, then go do it. I think that's also lends itself.
Can I challenge you on that a little bit?
Please do.
I think you want to listen, but then do what you decide to do. So,
but who are you listening to?
You listen to everybody whose opinion you respect, and you're going to get lots of contradictory advice.
That's a tough one for me.
Well, I don't say, when I say listen, I don't mean follow their advice
I understand.
necessarily,
Yeah,
but listen, hear what they have to say. Because even if somebody who's telling you not to do it might have a piece of information that fits into the
I agree.
puzzle and helps you figure it out. Um, I
I agree with
the
that.
passion is a dangerous thing too, because
It is.
most of those people who go out of business were passionate as well. You know,
Sure.
passionate is essential, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough to get you there. So, you know, it's a really complicated thing. But again, you're so right about all of this, especially the bravado thing, because you need some of that bravado, but everybody hits a wall at some point where they've reached the limits of their own expertise and knowledge. And suddenly, having ignored everything that everybody was telling them, they got to start listening. They get to a point where they've taken the business as far as they can on their own.
Sure.
They've got to hear from other people who know how to take it further. And at that point, that bravado can become a real problem, a real flaw, as you put it.
Totally agree. And I ran into that, just for the listeners and viewers that are getting a lot more Stan the Annuity Man information they've ever dreamt of. But a couple of years ago, I decided to hire a person to be CEO and director of operations, and remove myself from the day-to-day, because I had taken it to that point, and also understanding where your talents lie. And it's been a great and profitable decision. But for all entrepreneurs, that's very difficult. It's also difficult for people that are in the investment world, that are do-it-yourselfers, to go to an expert and listen to that expert, whether it's me and the annuity side or somewhere else, for help. I think if you're correct, whether you're an entrepreneur in business, whether you're an entrepreneur that's retired now managing their money, or volunteering, you still have to seek out expert advice. Whether you take that or not is up to you. But I do think that, as I said before, the older I get, the less I realize that I know. And I think that is a positive, because you're always seeking for information. And I would think that if there's any way to track it, entrepreneurs that aren't successful aren't open to change and aren't open to pivoting, even though it might mean changing the name or changing the direction or changing what they're doing. Because Stan the Annuity Man was not initially called Stan the Annuity Man. It was called something else until the clients told me to call it that. And we hired a PR firm and did focus groups, and I listened to that.
You listen to your clients,
and I did, and that's been a good thing going forward. But I think this is fascinating for my listeners, because there's a lot that are retired, but they always say, "Well, I'm busier than I've ever been." I mean, I'm retired, but I'm busy. That's the entrepreneur in you. That's, whether you're starting a business doesn't matter, but you're busy getting your life together. And maybe chapter 2 of entrepreneurism is managing your life, and managing chapter 2, and managing your family, and managing travel, and managing that to-do list and that bucket list that I'm telling people to bring out. Because, as Loren, you'll love this saying, I tell my clients all the time, there's no U-Hauls behind hearses. And if you see one, take a picture and send it to me. But there's not. You can't take it with you. And if COVID has done one thing for all of us out here,
if you all could figure that out, you know, if they could figure out a way, that would be so good for their business.
Yeah, there's no U-Hauls behind hearses, but that would be cool. But you can't take it with you. And COVID has told us the fragility of life is real. And this kind of coincides with entrepreneurism, in my opinion. Entrepreneurs always say, people call me with ideas all the time. I'm like, well, just, take a shot at it. Take a shot at it and see what happens. It's kind of the same thing in retirement for people that are in retirement. The entrepreneurial flavor of the decision is take the shot, travel. Take the shot, spend the money. Take the shot, buy the Lamborghini. Take the shot. And there's some entrepreneurial flair on both, because both feel, it feels out of character for most people to do those type of things, whether it's start a business or travel like they've never traveled before. Do you think there's a correlation there?
I do. I would add one word to what you're saying. I think the best entrepreneurs take an educated shot, and that's really important. When you're talking about the failure rate for businesses, it's so high, but it's lower for people who go about it the right way. Mm-hmm. So if if you've been, the number two at a company for 10 years and really come to understand an industry, and then you go off to do it on your own, you're not going to have the same failure rate as somebody who is just out of school and says, hey, I want to go into whatever industry. It's a very different thing. Both things can work, but if you're taking an educated risk and you've really take the time to figure out what needs to be figured out, that makes a huge difference. And I think that applies to all the examples you gave, including travel. If you're smart about the approach you take, you're going to end up being glad you invested the money in whatever you did. If you just wing it, you may not be. It's taking that time, I think, is important.
I think we've come up with it just hit me when you were talking, Loren, and I'm giving you this. This is yours. You can be an entrepreneur in business, and you can be an entrepreneur in life. An entrepreneur in business, we all know what that is, but an entrepreneur in life, which is a lot of the people those baby boomers, entrepreneur in life is taken as Loren said, educated decisions and what that you might perceive as risk because it's out of your comfort zone. But once again, doing things that instinctively feels right, but you might have never ever planned on doing. Another question that hit me was, you can comment on that. Maybe you have an idea, entrepreneur in life. Is there such a thing, or did I just make something up out of midair?
I think you're right on target. I think it's all about an approach to life, not just business.
So we're all entrepreneurs. Everybody on here is entrepreneur. What they've got to figure out is, am I an entrepreneur in business or am I an entrepreneur in life, right?
I absolutely, taking a job you can be taking a job working for somebody else and still be entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
And there's still risk involved. You can go to a company that, maybe that company is going to succeed, maybe it's not. Maybe you have to pick up and move across the country. There are all sorts of aspects to it that can make it an entrepreneurial opportunity. And it has to do with your entire approach to life. I think you're, right on target.
There you go. I mean, I my clients, I'm going to start using that. You need to be a life entrepreneur. You need to look at life like a business and go live it.
And that doesn't mean
implement the plan, the educated plan that's been put in place.
And that some people will hear in that you're telling them to take more risks, and that's not necessarily what you're telling them. You're certainly not encouraging anybody to be reckless. You're encouraging them to think about the risk that they choose to take, and I think that's being
or the decisions they choose to make.
Right.
Which, I think that's a powerful message for people that are entering chapter 2 of their lives and saying, what am I doing? Who am I? What's my life's been defined up to this point. What's the definition now? And I think that if you embrace that, I just had a couple of clients that decided to move to Panama. That was what they're going to do. It's a lower cost of living, and they're going to do that. And I said, well, that's kind of an entrepreneurial thought, right? They've been thinking about it. They've been planning. They've been researching. They put together the plan. And now they're implementing the plan. There is no difference between that decision to go to Panama and the decision to open the widget factory down the street.
I agree completely. And to use your terminology, what you don't want to do is you don't want to go straight from chapter 2 to chapter 11.
No.
You want to measure your risk. And I bet those people going to Panama didn't just throw a dart at a map.
Took them 3 years. I talked to him. I said, how long have you been planning this? I've been planning for 3 years. I said, and with you, I was so happy for you coming on because I'm thinking, man, this just reeks, wrong word, but reeks of entrepreneurism, reeks of taking that leap, reeks of jumping off that proverbial cliff, as they say. Another question I have for you. I'm fascinated to understand the current trends with male, female races. What are you seeing in the entrepreneurial world as you're covering it and talking from the standpoint of just gender and race, and if there are any different trends than what we've seen in the past?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think I think things are moving in the right direction. They've moved way too slowly. Um, and I think we sometimes get caught up having the wrong focus and the wrong conversations. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. There's an awful lot of talk, but one way we measure how women and minorities are doing in entrepreneurship is by looking at how much funding they get out of Silicon Valley or other venture capitalists.
That's such a myopic view.
But you obviously understand exactly where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Not everybody does, but I know you get it. Here's my thing. I'm not a big fan of venture capital. I think I know it destroys more businesses than it creates. Now,
No doubt.
There's some businesses that need it. There's no other way that they're going to get to be, what they got to be without it. And that's fine. The problem is that the business model for a venture capitalist is to throw 10 businesses against the wall and hope that one sticks. And the other 9 lose out. And the shame is that some of those other 9 could have been terrific businesses if they hadn't been told to go for broke and do everything they could to make sure that the venture capitalists got the return they needed.
Right.
Because if all they did was double their money, that would be an abject failure. So that we can't let that happen. So here's the thing. All the focus on how much of that money is going to women and minorities, I sit there and look at that and I think, well, surely women and minorities have the same right to destroy their business with venture capital as everyone else. I don't want them to have that opportunity, taken away from them or not extended to them.
Absolutely.
But there are better ways to build a business, and there are better ways to look at whether entrepreneurship is succeeding for women and for minorities. So I think a lot has changed in the last couple of years. There was a lot of movement, especially after the George Floyd episode. A lot of big companies started rethinking who they were hiring, where they were putting their money. Here's a much better example than venture capital. Where do businesses spend their money? Not invest it. Where do they spend it? Are they looking to, is there a woman-owned or a minority-owned business that they can buy whatever they need from for their own business? That supporting somebody who's already in business and paying those bills on time, that's a way that people, at big companies can support smaller businesses and smaller entrepreneurs.
I think in the last decade, the purest form of entrepreneurism that I've witnessed and supported, you're going to probably laugh because it's so simplistic, are food trucks. I truly believe that is about as raw and ground floor of entrepreneurism as I've ever seen. And I love it because you don't have to build the sticks and bricks. You have to find a truck. You have to be able to cook. And it's
entrepreneurship
pure.
101.
It's 101 and it's beautiful. And I've seen that happen in every place that I go, and I travel a lot. And I just think that's a great example of no education needed, no barriers. Nobody's looking whether you're white or black or male or female. They're just looking for good food. Okay. And I think that is a situation that should be an example for people. I know that annuity agents and people in the financial business, these are entrepreneurs because most are just paid on commissions or what they earn, and otherwise they make zero.
Yep.
And I've been in the financial services business since I got out of college in 1988. And there were months you made zero, and my wife, bless her heart, she's still with me, but that's pure entrepreneurism as well. But I think the main reason people choose to be an entrepreneur in the business side, we've defined it now in 2 versions. There's business entrepreneurs and there's life entrepreneurs. The business entrepreneurs are doing it because they want to run their own show and not answer anybody and have no ceiling on what they earn. Okay. But the life entrepreneurs, now that we're talking about that, these are people that don't want to answer anyone anyway, either. They want to consult with their spouse or partner to make the decisions going forward on chapter 2 of their life. And they're going to plan just like they're planning in business. I would encourage everybody on this podcast to start, put yourself into one of those 2 categories. business entrepreneur, whether you're working for someone, because Loren just pointed out very astutely that you can be an entrepreneur, work for somebody, you can. And those are, by the way, those are the best companies to work for that allow you to have that type of creative freedom. And then you know you're going to be in the second phase of entrepreneurism, which is a life entrepreneur, which is managing chapter 2 of your life, whatever that means to you and however you define it. So I think the topic today is, it covers everybody. And the title might be life entrepreneur or business entrepreneur. Which one are you? By the way, you can be both, or you can be just one. It's your call. Actually, the one for people, you're going to be one of the two. You're going to be a life entrepreneur eventually. That's going to happen. So I think this is fantastic, the whole life entrepreneur stuff. In closing, what would you tell people, the listeners, that they're ranging anywhere from in their 40s to in their 80s, Loren, which is a big range of people. What would you give them on the way out as kind of nuggets that you would want them to take away from this?
Well, depending where they are on that age range and what their experiences have been, if they've been taking the time to listen to this conversation and they're still with us,
they're with us, baby. They don't leave.
Then they have something to give. They have expertise. They have capital. They have a dream. They've got something. And I think, again, depending on that age range, although, that has changed through the years. I mean, you don't have to be 40 to start a business anymore. People are starting their businesses in their 70s. And I love that. Obviously, they don't have the same dreams as somebody in their 20s, but it can be done. And, people are, you're less likely to do it for financial reasons, but you might do it for the passion. And that's a beautiful thing. If your interests lie towards actually starting a business, I think what you said about the food truck is everything. I think, if you take an idea to any smart entrepreneur, the first thing they're going to ask you is, well, I know Aunt Sally has great spaghetti sauce, but has she tried to sell it yet? You got to test it. You got to find out if people are real. And that's true if it's food, but it's also true in just about anything else that you can sell. So your food truck analogy is right on target. Find a way to test your theory before you, go too far down the road. If you're not looking to start a business, you have some area of expertise where you could help. And there's a way to find someone who needs that expertise. And I really encourage people to try to do that. It's been harder the last couple of years with the pandemic, but there's still ways to do it. You can, depending on where your interests and expertise lies, you can find somebody who is looking for exactly what you have to offer. And it's great when that connection gets made.
Ladies and gentlemen, that genius you heard right there is Loren Feldman, 21hats.com, 21hats.com. I would encourage you to go there and listen to his podcast. Give it a listen. I think you're going to like what he's doing and the direction he's going. And hopefully we can have him back on the program now that we've created a new category of life entrepreneur. And he's going to, by this time in 6 months, he's going to have something written about it. But Loren, I really appreciate you being on the program. And I appreciate every single person listening on all podcast platforms and watching us interact on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. My name is Stan the Annuity Man. I am America's Annuity Agent, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Fun with Annuities. Please hit the subscribe button and make sure to go to my site at theannuityman.com, where you can run your own SPIA, DIA, and QLAC quotes and see a live feed of the best MIGA fixed rates in the country, and even get indexed and income rider quotes as well. You can also sign up for my 6 Annuity Owner's Manual books, and I'll ship them for free and under no obligation. I also encourage you to schedule a one-on-one call with me, Stan the Annuity Man, so we can have a full discussion of your specific situation. It will be the best brutally factual and truthful advice you will ever get, and that's one guarantee you should definitely take advantage of. So join me next time for the #1 annuity podcast on the planet, Fun with Annuities.